and I hope that wasn't on film.
I don't know, but it can be edited out if indeed it is. Right, darling? We can edit things out?
Yeah.
Of course, right. Well, welcome to our Confessions of Nat Turner podcast. We have Mr. Thomas Gray
Good morning.
and Mr. Nat Turner.
Hello.
And I'm Sherry Bailey. And we've got Darlene Reese on camera. And we are in the process of developing the Confessions of Nat Turner for the stage. We have been going through the text with a fine tooth comb to determine exactly how to do this the most effective way. And we've come to a point where we have created a third character, really, to tell the confessions. And that is what we actually haven't named them yet, but it is a narrator, and an unknown narrator. I think that's the term we've been using in terms of telling the story. Because if we were to do it literally as the way it's written, Nat Turner would be talking uninterrupted for about, an hour. And that's not fair to Jamel in terms of dividing the work up here.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
The narrator's title keeps changing. The unreliable narrator is one we come back to, though I'm not sure we're going to stick with it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's fair to call him unreliable because basically we're telling him what to say. And invisible is not quite right.
Biased narrator, perhaps. There are passages in the text that strike us as suspicious. Not necessarily in terms of the events they describe, but the wording to describe the events. We suspect, though there's no way to prove it, that when Gray wrote down Turner's confessions, he finessed some of the language to make his side of the political and sociological dispute come out looking better. And so those lines are the ones we're focusing most on transferring directly from Turner to the narrator.
So what we're going to do today is we're going to start at the top of the conversation, and we will be stopping and all that kind of stuff along the way.
Oh, before you, something just occurred to me about 15 seconds ago.
What?
It's not something we can use for this performance. There's not nearly enough time to prepare for it. But if we do develop this into something that gets performed multiple times, if we stage it with Turner and Gray in the foreground at a table and a backlit curtain behind the screen, we can have mimes acting out some of the material.
I'm so glad you said that. Yeah, absolutely.
So that way, the figures who are kind of shadowy in the text, Turner's, the men who followed Turner in his uprising, the white families who fell to him, the militia that assembled. We can actually have a fairly small cast just stepping in, filling multiple roles because they're all in shadow.
Right, or we can even use cutouts, and we can do. It's definitely going to be a multimedia effort, and
Interpretive dance.
Hey, we're open to everything.
So
we're open to it all.
Something to discuss for next time.
Absolutely. So, okay, well, let's take it from the top here and see what we come up with.
All right. Agreeable to his own appointment, on the evening that he was committed to prison, with permission of the jailer, I visited Nat on Tuesday, the 1st of November, when, without being questioned at all, he commenced his narrative in the following words.
Sir, you have asked me to give history of the motives which endorsed me to undertake the late insurrection, as you called it. To do so, I must go back to the days of my infancy, and even before I was born. I was 31 years of age, and the 2nd of October last, and born the property of Benjamin Turner of this county. In my childhood, a circumstance occurred which made an
Indelible.
indelible impression on my mind and laid the groundwork of that enthusiasm which has terminated so fatally to many, both white and black, and for which I am about to atone at the gallows. It is here necessary to relate this circumstance. Trifling as it may seem, it was the commencement of that belief which has grown with time. And even now, sir, in the dungeon, helpless and forsaken as I am, I cannot divest myself of being at play with other children. When 3 or 4 years old, I was telling them something which my mother overhearing said it had happened before I was born. I stuck to my story, however, and related some things which went in her opinion to confirm it. Others being called on were greatly astonished, knowing that these things had happened, and caused them to say in my hearing, I surely would be a prophet, as the Lord had shown me things that had happened before my birth. And my father and mother strengthened me in this my first impressions, saying in my presence I was intended for some great purpose, which they had always thought for certain marks on my head and breast.
A parcel of excrescences which I believe are not at all uncommon, particularly among Negroes, as I have seen several with the same. In this case, he has either cut them off or they have nearly disappeared.
My grandmother, who was very religious and to whom I was much attached, my master, who belonged to the church, and other religious persons who visited the house, and whom I often saw at prayers. Noticing the singularity of my manners, I supposed my uncommon intelligence for a child remarked I had too much sense to be raised, and if I was never be to any service to anyone as a slave. To a mind like mine's, restless, inquisitive, and observant on everything that was passing, it is easy to suppose that religion was the subject to which it would be directed. And although this subject principally occupied my thoughts, there was nothing that I saw or heard of to which my attention was not directed. The manners in which I learned to read and write not only had great influence on my mind, as I acquired it with the most perfect ease, so much so that I had no recollection whatsoever of learning the alphabet.
But let me stop us here. I feel like this is something that a narrator can do.
All right, you want me to take over which lines?
I think where we have that these hyphens.
All right. So,
and although the subject principally occupied my thoughts, let's pick it up at the manner in which I learned to read and write.
right.
So, and that give us, although the subject principally occupied my thoughts.
Although the subject principally occupied my thoughts, there was nothing that I saw or heard of to which my attention was not directed. The manner in which I learned to read and write not only had great influence on my life,
that's where
on my own mind.
Oh, I'm supposed to pick up at the manner. Okay.
Okay.
So, give me my feeder line from there was nothing that I saw and stop it directed, and I'll pick it up.
Mhm. There was nothing that I saw or heard of to which my attention was not directed.
The manner in which he learns to read and write not only had great influence on his own mind, as he acquired it with the most perfect ease, so much so that he had no recollection whatever of learning the alphabet, but to the astonishment of the family one day, when a book was shown to him to keep him from crying, he began spelling the names of different objects.
This was a source of wonder to all in the neighborhood, particularly the blacks.
Um,
And this,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
no,
I think the first part of the dialogue in the hyphen is still rather in interior experience to
Mhm.
Nat. I have no recollection whatever of learning the alphabet. And it might be better if the narrator takes up after that, starting with, but to the astonishment of the family, one day.
and ends at objects. Okay, let's try that and see that
and-
word before we actually mark it.
Actually,
You mean to pick up that but to-
the narrator would pick up started but to the astonishment of the family
uh-huh.
and end at particularly the blacks.
Okay. So it would be the Nat would be reading everything up through
Yeah.
learning the alphabet.
Yeah.
So-
Or actually, should I keep going through particularly the blacks or through all improved at all opportunities?
Well, we got to see how it works first.
Okay.
Okay, so all right. So you want to pick it up from but?
Yeah, but yeah, I'll pick up from but to the astonishment of the family.
Okay,
Mhm.
so let me start from the.
Okay.
Yeah.
The manners in which I learned to read and write not only had great influence on my own mind as I acquired it with most perfect ease, so much so that I had no recollection whatsoever of learning the alphabet. But the alphabet.
But to the astonishment of the family, one day when a book was shown him to keep him from crying, he began spelling the names of different objects. This was a source of wonder to all in the neighborhood, particularly the blacks.
And this learning was constantly improved at
Actually,
all
let-
opportunities.
Let's narrator take it all the way to opportunities.
Okay.
And then pick it up Nat.
All right. So, but to the astonishment of the family, one day when a book was shown him to keep him from crying, he began spelling the names of different objects. This was a source of wonder to all in the neighborhood, particularly the blacks. And this learning was constantly improved at all opportunities.
When I got large enough to go to work while employed, I was reflecting on many things that would present themselves to my imagination. And whenever an opportunity occurred of looking at a book, when the school children were getting their lessons, I would find many things that the fertility of my own imagination had depicted to me before. Had depicted in me before all my time, not devoted to my master's service, was spent either in prayer or in making experiments in casting different things in mounds, in mounds made of molds. That really does sound like mounds.
Okay.
You sure it's molds?
Like short
Yeah,
molds.
Yeah.
It's a British spelling.
Yeah. The U is not in our
Okay.
English.
In molds made of earth, in attempting to make paper, gunpowder, and many other experiments that, although I could not perfect, yet convinced me of its practicability if I had the means.
He was not addicted to stealing in his youth, nor had he ever been. Yet such was the confidence of the Negroes of the neighborhood, even at this early period of his life, that in his superior judgment, that they would often carry him with them when they were going on any roguery to plan for them. Growing up among them, with his confidence in his superior judgment, and when this, in their opinions, was perfected by divine inspiration, from the circumstances already alluded to in his infancy, and which belief was ever afterward zealously inculcated by the austerity of his laugh and manners, which became the subject of remark by white and black.
Having soon discovered to be great, I must appear so, and therefore studiously avoided mixing in society, and wrapped myself in mystery, devoting my time to fasting and prayer.
By this time, having arrived at man's estate, and hearing the scriptures commented on at meetings, he was struck with that particular passage which says,
Seek ye the kingdom of heaven, and all things shall be added unto you. I reflected much on this passage and prayed daily for light on this subject. As I was praying one day at my plow, the Spirit spoke to me, saying, Seek ye the kingdom of heaven, and all things shall be added unto you.
What do you mean by the Spirit?
The Spirit that spoke to the prophets in former days. And I was greatly astonished, and for 2 years prayed continuously, whenever my duty would permit. And then again, I had the same revelations, which fully confirmed me in the impression that I was ordained for some great purpose in the hands of the Almighty. Several years rolled round, in which many events occurred to strengthen me in this my belief. At this time, I reverted in my mind to the remarks made in my childhood and the things that had been shown me, and as it had been said of me in my childhood by those by whom I've been taught to pray, both white and black, and in whom I had the greatest confidence that I had too much sense to be raised, and if I was, I would never be any of use to anyone as a slave. Now, finding I had arrived to man's estate, and I was a slave, and these revelations began being made known to me, I began to direct my attention to this great object, to fulfill the purpose for which, by this time, I felt assured I was intended. Knowing the influence I had obtained over the minds of my fellow servants, not by the means of conjuring and such like tricks for them. For them, I always spoke of such things with contempt. But by the communion of the spirits, whose revelations I often communicated to them, and they believed and said, my wisdom came from God. I now begun to prepare them for my purpose by telling them something was about to happen that would terminate in fulfilling the great promise that had been made to me.
About this time he was placed under an overseer, from whom he ran away, and after remaining in the woods 30 days, he returned, to the astonishment of the Negroes on the plantation, who thought he had made his escape to some other part of the country, as his father had done before.
But the reason for my return was that the Spirit appeared to me and said, I had my wishes directed to the things of this world, and not to the kingdom of heaven, and that I should return to the service of my earthly master. For he who knoweth his master will, and death is not, shall be beaten with many stripes. And thus have I chastened you. And the Negroes found fault and murmured against me, saying that if they had my sense, they would not serve any master in the world. And about this time, I had a vision, and I saw white spirits and black spirits engage in battle, and the sun was darkened. The thunder rolled in the heavens, and blood flowed in the streams. And I heard a voice saying,
Such is your luck, such you are called to see, and let it come rough or smooth, you must surely bear it.
I now withdrew myself as much as my situation would permit from the intercourse of my fellow servants, for the avowed purpose of serving the spirits more fully. And it appeared to me and reminded me of the things it had already shown me, and that it would then reveal to me the knowledge of the elements, the revolution of the planets, the operation of tides, and changing of the seasons.
After this revelation in the year 1825, and the knowledge of the elements being made known to him, he sought more than ever to obtain true holiness before the great day of judgment should appear.
And then I began to receive the true knowledge of faith. And from the first steps of righteousness into the last, I was made perfect, and the Holy Ghost was with me, and said,
Behold me as I stand in the heavens.
and I looked, and I saw the form of man in the different altitudes. And there were lights in the sky, to which the children of darkness gave other names than what they really were. For they were the lights of the Savior's hands, stretched forth from east to west, even as they were intended on the cross of Calvary for the redemption of sinners. And I wondered greatly at these miracles, and prayed to be informed of the certainty of the meaning thereof, and shortly afterwards, while laboring in the field, I discovered drops of blood on the coin, as though it was dew from the heavens, and I communicated it to many, both white and black, in the neighborhood, and then found it. Oh, is that on?
Then found on.
Okay. Mark that so I can make sure I read that a little bit better. Okay. Then found on the leaves in the woods hieroglyphic characters and numbers, which the forms of man in different attitudes portrayed in blood, and represented the figures I had seen before in the heavens, and now the Holy Ghost had revealed itself to me, and made plain the miracles it had shown me. For as the blood of Christ had been shed on this earth, and had ascended to heaven for the salvation of sinners, and I was now returned to earth again in the form of dew. And as the leaves on the trees bore the impression of figures I had seen in the heavens, it was plain to me that the Savior was about to lay down the yoke he had borne for the sins of man. And the great day of judgment was at hand. About this time, I told these things to a white man,
Ethelred T. Brantley,
on whom it had a wonderful effect, and he ceased from his wickedness, and was attacked immediately with a continuous eruption. I'm gonna get that word four times.
The language is pretty dense.
And blood oozed from the pores of his skin. And after praying and fasting 9 days, he was healed. And the Spirit appeared to me again and said,
As the Savior has been baptized, so should we be also.
And when the white people would not let us be baptized by the church, we went down into the water together in the sight of many who reviled us, and were baptized by the Spirit. After this, I rejoiced greatly and gave thanks to God. And on the 12th of May, 1828, I heard a loud noise in the heaven. And the Spirit instantly appeared to me and said, because we don't have that marked down. So do you want to say that, or should I say that?
You're on a roll.
Yeah, I'd say keep going.
Yeah,
Okay.
You're on a roll.
Appeared and said, the serpent was loosened, and Christ had laid down the yoke he had borne for the sins of man, and that I should take it on and fight against the serpent. For the time was fast approaching when the first should be last, and the last should be first.
Do you not find yourself mistaken now?
Was not Christ crucified? And by signs in the heavens that it would make known to me, I should commence the great work, and until the first sign appeared, I should conceal it from the knowledge of man. And on the appearance of the sign,
An eclipse of the sun last February.
I should arise and prepare myself, and slay my enemy with their own weapons. And immediately on the sign appearing in the heavens, the seal was removed from my lips, and I communicated the great work laid out for me to do, to four in whom I had the greatest confidence: Henry, Hart, Nelson, and Sam. It was intended by us to have begun the work of death on the 4th July, last. Many were the plans formed and rejected by us, and it affected my mind to such a degree that I felt sick. And the time passed without our coming to any determination how to commence. You know, that's very interesting to me. I didn't even notice that. I guess because I was reading so fast and wasn't really taking my time. He felt sick, that he was actually doing this work. So it kind of really does kind of make you wonder a little bit that maybe we were kind of wrong. Maybe he did have compassion all this time for what he did. He just thought it was his calling.
It's possible.
So you're doubting whether or not he felt called to do this, or if he was
No. I'm not doubting whether he felt called. At first, I was doubting that he was just heartless. If you really want to know the truth.
Yeah.
But now that I read that,
Right.
Maybe he did actually put thought in this and was compassionate about it. But he was like, but this is my duty. So even though I may not feel comfortable about it, I have to go on, which is very interesting.
So he may have been psychotic, but he was definitely not a sociopath.
Pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, it's an important question to answer because people say you ask the question now: was Nat Turner a madman or a hero?
Right.
And you get madman from a lot of people because
of the killing.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. I mean, he must be a killer. He's a murderer.
Right.
A bad person.
Right. But then you read that.
And it's his humanity.
You're right. Exactly. That's the word I was looking for. He shows his humanity. So, yeah, it does kind of put a twist on things, and it's just a start on startling revelation. Okay, but continuing.
No, I mean, and this is exactly what we need to be able to figure out because ultimately, we're actually going to have to make a statement about what we're, what the audience is seeing, you know, and so we need to be clear about what we're saying.
Okay, so I'm gonna pick it up at many.
Okay.
Many were the plans formed and rejected by us, and it affected my mind to such a degree that I felt sick. And the time passed without our coming to any determination how to commence, still forming new schemes and rejecting them when the sign appeared again, which determined me not to wait any longer. Since the commencement of 1830, I had been living with Mr. Joseph Travis, who was to me a kind master and placed the greatest confidence in me. In fact, I had no cause to complain of his treatment to me. Stopping right there again. That shows another part of his humanity. Because even though he was on this killing expedition of killing white men, he had no complaints about his own master, but yet he killed him anyway. So that goes to show you that this was really something he thought he was really called to do. Because it's just like me killing you, Greg. No pun intended.
It always comes back to that Elmo thing, doesn't it?
No, but you see what I'm saying, though. It's just like me killing you. Even though I care about you, but I felt it's just like me stabbing a knife in you and saying you asking me why, and I'm saying because I had to. Even though
it wasn't a matter of personal revenge.
Right. Exactly.
Nothing personal.
Right. It was something he felt like he had to do. And like I said, that's very interesting because as we get more into this, I think a lot of people, especially when they get to the deaths, they be like, oh, this guy's a madman. But remember, he killed his own master who he thought was a great person.
He said a kind master, right. Exactly. Right. This is really important too, because you have to find the humanity in Nat Turner.
Right.
Uh,
And it's hard to do,
mhm.
especially, well, this is accordance to Gray, so you really don't know. This is his accordance of what went down. But it's hard to do because like you said, so many people would think of him as a savage because of
Right.
what went down.
Right.
So I think it's very interesting that in this passage, you really got to look for it. It's hidden.
Mhm.
So you got to look for the humanity parts
Mhm.
because if you don't, you're going to skip right past them.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And yeah, you're digging deep, as they say.
Right. Okay. I had no cause to complain of this treatment to me.
On Saturday evening, 20th of August, it was agreed between Henry, Hook, and Nat to prepare a dinner the next day for the men they expected, and then to concert a plan, as they had not yet determined on any. Hawk on the following morning brought a pig, and Henry brandy, and being joined by Sam, Nelson, Will, and Jack, they prepared in the woods a dinner.
Well, about 3 o'clock, I joined them.
Why were you so backward in joining them?
The same reason that they seized me not to mix with them for years before. I saluted them on coming up and asked Will, how came he there? He answered, his life was worth no more than others, and his liberty as dear to him. I asked him if he thought to attain it. He said he would, or lose his life. Let me reread that. I asked him if he thought to attain it. He said he would, or lose his life. That was enough to put him in full confidence. Jack, I knew, was only a tool in the hands of Hart. It was quickly agreed we shall commence at home
Mr. J. Travis's.
on that night, and until we had armed and equipped ourselves and gathered sufficient force, neither age nor sex was to be spared.
Which was invariably adhered to.
We remained at the feast until about 2 hours in the night, when we went to the house and found Alston. They all went to the cedar. Is that cedar? Cider. Why do I want to say cedar so bad? They all went to the cider press and drank, except myself.
On returning to the house, Hawk went to the door with an axe for the purpose of breaking it open. As they knew they were strong enough to murder the family if they were awakened by the noise, but reflecting that it might create an alarm in the neighborhood, they determined to enter the house secretly and murder them whilst sleeping.
Hart got a ladder and then set it against the chimney, on which I ascended and hosted a window, entering and came downstairs, unbarred the door, and removed the guns from their places. It was then observed that I must spill the first blood, on which, armed with a hatchet and accompanied by Will, I entered my master's chambers. It being dark, I could not give a death blow. The hatchet glanced from his head. He sprung from the bed and called his wife.
Who shall remain nameless.
It was his last words. Will laid him dead with the blow of his axe, and Mrs. Travis shared the same fate as she lay in the bed. The murder of this family, 5 in number, was the work of a moment that not one of them awoke. There was a little infant sleeping in the cradle that was forgotten until we had left the house and gone. Until we have left the house.
And gone some distance.
No, I skipped something.
Actually, I'm missing page 20 and 21. Oh, here it is.
Okay, hold on.
That's mine.
On that night, until we have left, okay, I'm talking about left the house. Okay. Hold on, whoa, where am I?
We were on the bottom of 21.
Okay, so how the heck did I get? Okay, I'm gonna start from Hart again. I lost my place. I'm sorry.
All right.
Okay. Hart got a ladder and set it against the chimney, on which I ascended and hosting a window.
Wait,
and hoisted a window, entered and came downstairs, unbarred the door, and removed the guns from their places. It was then observed that I must spill the first blood, on which, armed with a hatchet and accompanied by Will, I entered my master's chambers. It being dark, I could not give a death blow. The hatchet glanced from his head. He sprung from the bed and called his wife.
Whose name has gone unrecorded by history.
It was his last word. Will laid him dead with the blow of his axe, and Mrs. Travis shared the same fate. As she lied in the bed, the murder of this family, 5 in number, was the work of the moment. Not one of them awoke. There was a little infant sleeping in the cradle that was forgotten until we had left the house and gone some distance. When Henry and Will returned and killed it, we got here 4 guns that would shoot, and several old muskets with a pound or 2 of powder. We remained some time at the barn where we paraded. I formed them in a
Let me
line.
stop for a second here, just to kind of note what is said here. We're talking about they forgot a baby in the cradle, and they went back and killed that baby.
Right.
That's pretty savage, you know, and so I want it not to be just kind of glossed over, or, you know, I think something needs to be added there.
Well, yeah, I mean, as you said, you know, people are definitely going to think he was a savage because of, you know, I don't think they're going to be minded that much about the killing of adults, but I damn sure think they're going to be about the killing of infants.
You're right, exactly.
So
And later it's
that's going to be
tempting, yeah.
right. That's going to be the tipping bird for people. I don't really think they're going to care that much about the dog. Okay, he killed the adults, but when they hear the whole baby thing, you know, so yeah.
Also, do you want the narrator to take the murder of this family line?
I think so, because
Let me see the right pen for a moment. I want to mark that.
Oh, hold on, say that again.
The line, the murder of this family, up to not one of them awoke. I think that might be a good line for the narrator. I'm always doubtful of not describing anything he does as murder. So
Okay.
that's
Okay.
so let me just.
and that's choice. How long is the interview?
It's about 20 pages.
It's 3?
20 pages.
Okay, approximately, from y'all rehearsing.
Mhm.
How long is the interview?
We haven't been able to figure that. We were talking about,
We keep on interrupting it to make these notes, but we think it's going to take a little. We think it'll take between 45 minutes and an hour.
Okay, y'all gonna have to put some, you know what I mean? Break it up some kind of way with some action in it or something.
yeah,
Keep it from being monotonous, because just a straight like that is sound monotonous, and you lose your audience.
Well, yeah, that's what we're
Right.
thinking. But right now, we're just trying to get the material down before we actually start working on.
Sherry, I suggest you note where you want them to start when it comes to the floor movement.
Right.
To kind of get people's attention.
right. I mean, I'm making notes as I go along here and everything like that. So here we got like a hardcore audience here. But
well,
no,
yeah,
it's
I
good to
mean,
have
you know-
it's good to have you here, because that's exactly why we brought in this narrator here, because initially the way it's written, it's just Nat talking
So
straight.
he's narrating.
He's acting as Thomas Gray, who did
The
the interview,
attorney.
right?
Mhm.
But also we have him taking some of
the narration.
the narration, because it was all coming straight from that, and definitely we wanted to break that up, as well as, like you said, add the sound effects and the crowd. I mean, the people who are involved and everything like that. You know, we're not. You know, that's kind of going to come. You know, as we have more time to like develop the piece and everything like
yeah,
that.
Where did you
if
mark that?
From the murder.
But yeah,
to-
you're absolutely right.
So his narration is going to be recorded or something?
No,
I mean, to to show the difference between him narrating and him being the lawyer.
Yeah, this is kind of like we're figuring
we're-
out how to do that.
Yeah, we're working on that. And the way I'm playing it so far is just turning directly into the camera for narration, as if I'm stepping out of the scene. And when I'm asking Nat a question, facing him directly. But I do think we should have something else on top of that for a finished product, possibly a change in lighting. But we're still workshopping at this point and haven't figured out exactly how to handle that yet.
Yeah.
Okay, because the piece is so good, it's so important. Just make sure that people understand, is
Yeah.
grasping every last second of what y'all are saying to each other. This is a crucial thing, right? Isn't this what you wanted to get?
Yeah,
You wanted
absolutely.
people to know what happened
Right.
during that interview.
Right.
And if we want a break point in the narration, I think that we've actually just passed a good one. Right at the spot where it goes from planning and setup to the insurrection physically breaking out. I think that if we want some sort of pause to break up what's going on between the two of us with a song, a dramatic presentation, something, that would be a place to put it.
Yeah. Where exactly are you talking about?
So on page 21,
Mm-hmm.
Actually, starting with my narration on the return to the house, that's the beginning of the physical rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
Because, so, I mean, this is way too short to divide into acts, but if we
Mhm.
were, Act 1 would end with the insurrectionists going to the cider press and drinking to the coming revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And Act 2 would begin with them marching off to the first engagement of the
Mhm.
insurrection, the attack
Mm-hmm.
on the Travis house.
Okay, so where are you stopping at after the murder?
All right, I'm stopping at, the narrator's stopping at not one of them awoke, and I'm letting that pick up again at there was a little infant sleeping in the cradle. Towards the bottom of page 21. I've got it marked on my page, so you can copy it from here.
Nope. Because
Okay, why not?
you're already narrating. According to my notes, from the murder of the family all the way until the yard distance.
Okay,
And this section, we're gonna have to do the same thing with Sojourner Truth, is
that's not how I have
in
it.
terms of developing,
Um,
when you develop a one-person show.
So the way I
that's the
have
thing
it,
you have to work against. You
I
work
stop
with
at
is
awoke,
Figuring out
Nat takes over again at
where
the
to
bottom of
bring some
21,
break in
and
the
I
monot-
pick up
and the-
again
the
at
sameness of
Sam
the
and
film.
Will went to the door
One-person show,
on page 22.
I can kind of see
That's not how I have it.
some of
at
that.
all.
All right.
Mhm. Yep.
Okay, sorry.
Talking about,
So,
some deep things.
Okay, so we have something different. Okay.
all right.
Audience attention.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
but other than.
Okay. So no, I just mark it.
Okay.
I just mark it.
Actually, this is a good place to take a quick break. I'll be right back in.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's gonna be finding ways to kind of keep the conversation going.
Yeah, it's with her, if she's gonna do, if it's gonna be like a storytelling thing, like if it's one person show,
Mhm.
that's just an idea.
Mm-hmm.
Her telling about a couple of incidences that happened,
Mm-hmm.
that she was real. Like the time she got whipped as
Mm-hmm.
a child, that was cruel.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
would have put that man in jail.
Right.
If that had happened today, where he beat her with that piece of I don't know, was that a piece of iron or what that was he was beating her with,
Mm-hmm.
And
And see, something like that, you can deal with sound effects, have that.
yeah. And I can imagine how she must have screamed. She was just a child.
Right.
And then the time when they stuck them in that cellar.
Mm-hmm.
That's another story. That's the
Mhm.
creeps.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
even now today, I skip over that. When they get to that part about the cellar, I skip,
Well, you can't. We can't
No,
skip over it.
I skip over when I'm reading.
Yeah.
But
I hear ya.
yeah, that's gonna be that would be in my screenplay
Mm-hmm.
because it's so emotional.
Mm-hmm.
But because I get emotional when I read it because it's so deep. And even the lady says that every time she talks about that,
Mm-hmm.
you can see her getting,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mhm.
because it affected her so much.
Yeah.
Man,
Yeah.
that was the creeps.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was the creeps.
Yeah.
You know, sticking black people all like that, you know, in a wet, damp floor and making them sleep on that thing.
Sounds like the Holocaust.
Man.
Does sound like the Holocaust, doesn't it? But it's important, to be able to share this history because part of, I believe, kind of collective black low self-esteem is because we don't know the strength and the bravery in terms of that we're descended from. We don't really truly understand how much our ancestors dealt with. And so therefore, I firmly believe it's important for these stories to be, shown accurately from our perspective.
One of the things that I had read, somebody mentioned in one of the books about after she went through all that stuff,
Right.
that she ended up,
Afternoon.
How late will you guys be here today? I'm the director of music. How late will you be here today?
I don't know, but maybe a few more.
I mean, but just curious, I might be one locking up. You can give it a guess.
How long we're gonna be here? Yeah, we're gonna be here till about 4 or 5, somewhere in
Okay,
there.
great. Thank you. I'm just curious. I might be locking up.
Okay,
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I'd say, I'm sorry, I got into
I forgot.
I know, it didn't take much to get me off track here, but,
I was talking about, they said how she became the person she was. She was such a strong woman.
right,
You know, after all she went through, she just
didn't give up.
broke out.
Right.
It was like she had she was kind of passive at one point because when she became a true woman, she was so caught up into satisfying her master. That's how she built up all her muscles.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she was working harder than any man he had in there. And he used to brag about it. He said, you see, Annabella,
Mm-hmm.
you know, she's my best worker. She was chopping wood and carrying heavy stuff. So she ended up being muscular,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
I mean, she was what? Was she over 6 feet?
Mhm.
Do you know
Yeah,
how?
she was tall.
Yeah.
She was tall like a father. Her father was real tall.
Mm-hmm.
So she was tall and she was muscular and she looked at masculine.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a very heavy masculine
I
voice.
want to show you that. In fact, I brought that for you to see.
Yeah. hmm
It's like it was.
And she, by the time she got this age here,
Mm-hmm.
this was probably when she looked at me like when she got in her 80s, when on here.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, when she left that master, she stayed with him the longest. When she left him, he didn't abuse her, or other than when he promised he was gonna let her go, and he broke his promise.
Well, that's the biggest
that
abuse
was-
of all.
Yeah, because she was his favorite,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why his wife didn't like her.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's why the speech talks about her strength,
Mm-hmm.
because she had built up, she got so muscular,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and she knows she could outwork a man.
Mm-hmm.
She knew that
Mm-hmm.
from the pit of her heart.
Mm-hmm.
So she back and saying, what's this? Women don't get this equal to a man. And she says, here I am. I can outwork any man.
Mm-hmm.
And in the speech that she really did do, she says that I can, even now, because now she was not as young as she was,
Right.
but she was saying even then, at that present time,
Right.
at that age she was, she could still outbeat anybody,
Right.
any man,
Right.
you know.
Right.
And I guess evidently that persona she had, being tall
Mm-hmm.
and even though you couldn't see her muscles,
Mm-hmm.
you know, she because I think Cage made it seem like she showed her muscles. I can't remember. But
Mm-hmm,
she didn't show her muscles, but her persona was so strong,
mm-hmm,
and her voice being a heavy voice,
mm-hmm.
and she.
But it would have been with a Dutch accent, right?
Oh yeah, because she was Dutch. She was
Right.
Dutch, but
And
I-
what does that
I-
sound like? Do you know?
I seen some Dutch films,
Uh-huh.
and their accent is not really that much different. In fact, they got some Dutch people who recited the speech, the new speech. That's on the YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, I got that. I can probably send that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So,
They got some of the young Dutch and some of the older Dutch.
have you practiced it? What does it
African
sound?
Americans, yeah.
What does it sound like?
African Dutch Americans.
Can you give me a little sound bite of what it sounds like?
To me, their accent is not. I don't know. You have to kind of judge it yourself. The accent is not really strong enough. It could be that our culture became so entwined with the Dutch since all of New York and all the northern states, the Dutch had influenced it.
Mhm.
So that was so much until our dialect. That's part of the reason why I can't really pick it out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but you know it's not Southern.
Right.
Yeah, you know it's not a Southern accent.
Right. It's not dialect.
No, it's not. It's not Southern at all.
Mhm.
It's you know, and she couldn't read, so everything she knew from remembering,
Mm-hmm.
hearing and remembering.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, and because as soon as she got to the place where she could speak English,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and she wanted to speak English perfect.
Right.
You know, that was the perfectionist in her.
Right.
Yeah, so she got up there, making sure that people understood what she said when she said it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
That's right. She
Yeah.
sure did. Yeah, so
Take a look at it.
you was looking me up.
No, I
you
just wanted
just
to
wanted
just showing it to you. Unless did you feel you needed it for like creative purposes and so forth? Will it be something that you need that you can use in terms of development? You can hold on to it a little bit.
Boom.
Yeah,
No,
the
boom.
lady was what she went through, I'm telling you.
Yeah, again, telling that story, from
Yeah,
the
that's what-
personal angle, I think is really important.
Yeah, that was one of the things, because actually you set me on that path. That was you.
In terms of,
By asking me to do her in the first place.
oh, well, yeah.
Yeah, because I took an interest in her
Mhm.
as a person.
Mm-hmm.
At first I didn't want to say the speech unless I knew a little bit more about it. So I started doing my own research.
Right.
And that's when I started realizing some of the stuff that she went through.
Yeah.
But recently, when they came out with that Harriet Tubman movie,
Yeah.
I was saying Harriet Tubman, everything Harriet. I said they need to make something about the joint. I said,
Everything you make them buy both
I
of
said,
them,
let
you
me get my
know?
laptop. Got my what you call that Final Cut. Final Cut 11.
Editing.
Yeah.
I don't know. What's that, darling?
Let
What
me
is
get
that?
my Final Cut.
Final
yeah.
Cut?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. It's time for
Yeah.
us to start telling our
Let
own
me start
story.
writing myself.
Yeah.
Nobody gonna do this thing when let me do it.
You're right, exactly.
I mean, we're not going nowhere, but it needs to be done.
Don't stop it before it gets started. So, just go ahead and do it. Exactly. Yeah.
And then it could be because so many people done tried to twist up her story. I guess people not sure if how much is fictional, but that shouldn't make no difference. They make a lot of movies about people and they don't have no real cut proof. You're just going by what they believe. They still make the movie.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is why movies and television and all of this is like brain surgery, it really does, impact how people see the world. So,
Right,
they
so-
need to get the stories from our perspective about our history, and that's what's been missing. It's been, I always say the losers of the Civil War have narrated the story for the last 150 years. So, of course, they've told the story the way that makes them look
Right.
positive
Right.
and not so horrible or whatever like that. And no, it's time for us to tell the story from our perspective. And so that's what, Juneteenth, Virginia is all about, is kind of reframing this history in ways that, can tell the story in a new way. I mean, this is going to be a shock to people to see Nat Turner as a humane, thinking, person, not
Right.
some, rebel running around just killing people willy-nilly, it wasn't
Right,
that.
that he actually had humanity, and like
Yeah.
I said, that passage, like I said, you have to catch it, because if you don't,
Right.
you're not going to see it. It's one thing about Nat that I felt like that, as we was talking about yesterday,
Mhm.
he was not a man of many emotions.
Yeah.
So when he's telling his confessions, if you don't listen, you're not going to catch the humanity part of it.
Mhm,
And I think that's what and that's why I wanted to explain it, because as I said, when I read it, he killed his a person, he killed his own master, a person who he thought was kind and good to him.
mhm, mhm.
And so it goes, and then the part where he felt sick when coming up with the plans to do these killings.
Mhm.
Those two instances right there shows that even though I may not feel this is the right thing,
Mhm.
I feel this is what I was called to do.
Mhm.
And I don't think the audience is going to really get that unless they actually listen for it, unless they actually hear it and listen. Like, you really do have to project, and that's one thing I was thinking about doing, actually projecting that a little bit more.
Mhm.
Even though I felt sick, or something like that, give the expression of it,
Mhm.
so that people can really know, see the humanity of what he was doing.
Right. Right.
And then on that part where he said, even he was a kind and gentle master, we're projecting that a little bit better,
Mhm.
so that people can't see that side of the humanity of him and that,
Yeah.
because they're not going to get it either if that don't happen,
Right.
because like I said, people are already going to go into this thinking he's a savage.
Right. That is definitely how people
Yeah.
come to it.
Yeah,
Even those who support what he did,
right.
they have to believe that it was,
Yeah, well, like I said, I don't think people really have an issue with the killing of
the adults.
the adults. I think that when it comes to the children, that's what people
Yeah.
are gonna, oh my God, he's a monster.
Mhm.
That's where the monster part comes in.
Yeah.
So, like I said, even though it may not be something that he agreed to, maybe not even be something that he wanted to kill kids, because this is a kid.
Well, I mean, they said several times, regardless of gender or age,
Right,
so he went into it knowing that children would be involved.
right.
And then that's often what people say, women and children were killed. Well, women and children have died in every battle that's ever been fought. And also,
That's
over
happened in the Bible.
over 300 Black folks, men, women, and children died in the same time frame that those 60 white men, women, and children died. So,
Yeah, but
they
see,
never
that's
talk
the
about
whole,
that.
and the reason they never talk about that is because of, like I said, when it comes to Black lives in this country, they feel they're more expendable.
Black lives do matter.
Yeah,
Black lives matter.
exactly.
They didn't have that
And that's
slogan
not
in
in-
1831.
And
but
for
that's what we're
some
talking
reason,
about.
I don't understand how people see that as a negative to all lives. It's not a negative to all lives. It's an alert to Black lives. That's what it is. It hasn't, and I don't see how people got a negative
I think the way we look
incantation
at it is
when you
that,
say Black lives.
that white people feel as though that their lives already automatically matter. That's
Mhm.
automatically.
Mhm. It's a given.
Yeah, that's a given.
Mhm.
And I think they misinterpret. what
No,
we
I don't
are
think they
trying to
misinterpret
say.
at all. I think they know exactly what they're trying to say. I think it's a superiority complex,
Mm.
if you really want to know the
I
truth.
mean, they're insinuating that we're saying something that we're not. Because even Trump came more out with it.
Well, yeah, I guess you can say they're insinuating that we're saying something that we're
They're
not.
not saying, yeah.
But I think it really does have to do with a seniority complex, that we were the first, we want to remain the first, and anything that is challenging that, we're going to react.
Mm.
That's how I feel like it is, because there's no possible way that you can see George Floyd's murder, or see Aubrey's murder, or see any of that and think that was okay.
Mhm.
I'm talking about, excuse me,
Well, I mean, which one? The guy get all the murders mixed up. Which one is
George Floyd was the one that got killed by the cops.
they put
The
the
one with the
knee.
foot on his
Right.
on
head.
a-
Aubrey, what's the Aubrey Graham?
Ahmaud Arbery.
Ahmaud Arbery was the one who got shot by two civilians, claiming that they were defending their property.
Mhm.
And like you can't see those things. Even Breonna Taylor, you can't see those things, and as a human being, feel that's okay. But like I said, the reason that I feel that most whites haven't is taken up with this because it is a seniority complex. You know, okay, they died.
Superiority.
Yes,
they say.
superiority
Yeah,
complex. Okay, they died. Now what? So what? You know, we're marching in the street. Our lives matter. Our lives matter. Well, what about our lives? Well, why do you feel like it's an attack on your life? When have there ever been a question, like you said, when have there ever been a question that white lives didn't matter?
Yeah,
It was never a
they
question.
already know.
It was a question. White
They
lives
already
matter.
know.
White lives matter when they stole this country. White lives matter when they came up and interpreted the rules. White lives matter when they live by those rules. White lives matter when picking the president in every single. It took us how many years to get a minority president? I'm not going to say black. I'm going to say minority. Since you want to call Obama all these other things, it took us how many years for us to get a minority president? You see
And
what
the
I'm saying?
backlash to that
Yeah.
has been the election of Donald Trump.
Exactly.
And he's launched into white nationalism. and so forth like that.
So that's what I'm saying. It was never a question of white lives matter because they have always mattered. The reason that black lives, it was a question that black lives matter because we was getting killed at a highly disproportionate rate than other races, and the reason was because of we were seen as threats. Because if you remember, when we was doing peaceful protesting, sit-ins, marches, and all of this, all of that was met with violence. And we just stood back and let it happen. But as soon as we start reacting, we're the violent ones. As soon as we get tired of it, we're the violent ones. As soon as we decide to fight back, we're the violent ones. So that's what kind of tripped me out about the whole thing.
Because you fight them. They get
Right,
afraid.
exactly.
Well, I mean, it is, again, the reason why it is important for us to be able to control the telling of the stories. We have to be the ones telling the story as opposed to allowing the story to be shared, from other perspectives. And the big problem that the nationalists are going to have is that they all talk about going back to the Constitution, being an originalist in terms of like following the Constitution. But the Constitution basically protected slavery with the 3/5 formula, which said that basically Black folks were only 3/5 human as a way of being able to create a taxation plan for the Southern planters. And if constitutional originalists want to like go back to the original Constitution, they got to deal with that. And they haven't figured out an answer to that yet.
Well-
First Amendment, Second Amendment, they understand. But that protection of slavery, they can't figure out.
I've got to jump in here. The Constitution actually differentiated between slaves and free blacks there. It counted free blacks the same as it counted whites, and counted slaves as 3/5 of a free person of whatever color for taxation and representation purposes.
Well, it's still there.
It's there, but I think it's important to correctly define what it is before we, as the basis for our critique of it.
Okay, fair enough.
The only thing that I don't want us to do as blacks is get too complacent. I do not want people to think that we as a race that we don't do anything bad or that we don't do anything or that we don't commit crimes or anything like that. Because every single race and nationality does. You take the good, you got your bad, you got your good. And that goes with any race. And that's the only thing that I don't want blacks to get complacent about. Do not think just because of Black Lives Matter movement that you think we don't do anything. Everything is always false
Okay,
narrative.
fine. We can talk about the negative, but we also need to balance it with the positive. I mean,
Right,
I don't
and-
want
and
people
don't
to
get me
think that
wrong.
Black folks had no sense of agency in terms of ending slavery. And because it's still dealing with the effects of it, people say, well, they must have just kind of like, said, what can I do about it? And sat back and, sat down and, comply.
Yeah, but
we did not.
But I think people also taking it as a referendum on that we don't do anything wrong. How many times have you heard in our neighborhood a black person that robbed 5 banks, killed four people, and still you have the people in the neighborhood free him? Why?
Mm.
Why are we freeing him? He ain't do nothing wrong. He had to rob those banks. He had to kill those people. He did?
Mm.
I'm serious. I don't.
You're agreeing? You say you're agreeing with me?
No, I was saying, who you talking about?
I'm just talking about in general, especially in my neighborhood. I heard all the time, free my N-word, Tay or D or anything like that. And then I asked, what did D do?
Mm-hmm.
What did Tay do?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he only shot 5 people, man. It was only 5. So I'm just saying that's what we always do, and that's what it seems like it's becoming now. That we don't do anything wrong, and that if we do something wrong, it shouldn't be punished.
Well, I actually can't. The whole that reminds me of the conversations I've had about Bill Cosby, OJ. In terms of like
Sensitive subject.
it's very sensitive, and
Yes.
I must admit that
Sherry know how I feel about those two.
right, and we're kind of, let's just say we're on polar opposites in terms
Right,
of like,
I'm
the
serious.
conversation,
And one problem is that there are Black people who do things that deserve punishment, but the punishments that are inflicted by our society are often not proportionate to the crime. Passing bad checks is not a capital offense.
Right.
And pointing out that a man who was choked to death by police had a history of passing bad checks does not excuse the police murdering him.
Right.
For that crime, he deserves a fine or maybe 3 to 6 months in jail. He does not deserve execution.
I mean, the great example of the disparity between the sentencing is like how crack cocaine versus powder cocaine was, charged far more harshly than powder cocaine, So that's a fine example of that kind of.
I agree with both of you on what you're saying. I do agree with you, Greg, that our punishments are a little bit more harsher when it comes to our race than it is when it comes to other races. But like I say, I still don't want to get complacent in saying that Blacks don't do anything wrong.
No, nobody's talking that we've got, Wakanda. Here, we're not saying that. We're just saying, it's needs to be a little bit more balanced in terms of how.
And I agree with that. It does, and that's why I'm in favor of justice reform. And actually, that's why it kind of is justice reform, because now I don't even think police are really doing their job no more because of this whole justice reform thing. I think they want to sit in the shadows now, and that to me is an issue because this is what you're getting paid for.
They need to be better trained, and
that's another thing. I don't understand why isn't there mental health evaluation every 3 to 6 months for police officers? I don't get that, especially in a highly stressful environment as it is to be in a cop.
Yeah.
Why don't they have?
They need better training. I mean, people
That's
like,
crazy.
They're not. Social
we're better
workers, so
at
train them.
We are better at enforcing rules of engagement on our soldiers in foreign countries who are fighting active armed enemies of the United States than we are in enforcing rules of behavior on police officers who are supposed to be protecting our own citizens.
Yeah.
Well, like I always say, who do we run to when those who are supposed to protect and serve are the ones we need protection from?
Quis custodiet, quis custodes.
But moving on. Okay. So we're picking it up at.
Since the commencement of 1830.
Okay. Since the commencement of 1830, I had been living with Mr. Joseph Travis, who was to me a kind master and placed the greatest confidence in me. In fact, I had no cause to complain of his treatment to me.
Yeah, right. Top of 20.
Okay, thank you. On Saturday evening, the 20th of I need to get back into character.
Take your time. That's what rehearsals are for.
On Saturday evening, the 20th of August, it was agreed between Henry, Hawk, and Nat to prepare a dinner the next day for the men they expected, and then to concert a plan as they had not yet determined on any. Hawk, on the following morning, brought a pig, and Henry brandy, and being joined by Sam, Nelson, Will, and Jack, they prepared in the woods a dinner.
Well, about 3 o'clock, I joined them.
Why were you so backward in joining them?
The same reason that caused me not to mix with them for years before.
I saluted them on coming up and asked Will, how came he there? He answered, his life was worth no more than others, and his liberty as dear to him. I asked him if he thought to obtain it. He said he would or lose his life. This was enough to put him in full confidence. Jack, I knew, was only a tool in the hands of Hart. It was quickly agreed we should commence at home.
Mr. J. Travis's.
On that night, and until we had armed and equipped ourselves and gathered significant blah blah blah. I'm not doing this today. And gathered significant. That's significant. Sufficiently.
Sufficient.
Okay.
Sufficient.
And gathered sufficient force. Neither age nor sex was to be spared.
Which was invariably adhered to.
We remained at the feast until about 2 hours in the night, when we went to the house and found Austin. They all went to the cider press and drank. Cider press and drank, except myself.
On returning to the house, Hawk went to the door with an axe for the purpose of breaking it open, and we, as they were now strong enough to murder the family if they were awakened by the noise, but reflecting that it might create an alarm in the neighborhood, they determined to enter the house secretly and murder them whilst sleeping.
Hart got a ladder and set it against the chimney, on which I ascended, and hoisting a window, entered and came downstairs, unbarred the door, and removed the guns from their places. It was then observed that I might have to spill the first blood, on which, armed with a hatchet and accompanied by Will, I entered my master's chambers. It being dark, I could not give a death blow. The hatchet glanced from his head. He sprung up from the bed and called his wife,
whose name remains unrecorded by history.
It was his last words. Will laid him dead with the blow of his axe, and Mr. Travis shared the same fate as she lay in bed.
The murder of this family, 5 in number, was the work of a moment. Not one of them awoke.
There was a little infant sleeping in a cradle that was forgotten until we had left the house and gone some distance, when Henry and Real returned and killed it. We got here 4 guns that would shoot and several old muskets with a pound or 2 of powder. We remained some time at the barn where we paraded. I formed them in a line as soldiers, and after carrying them through all the maneuvers, I was masters of the march. I was master
of Stappet's glory.
I was master of march. I was master of
comma, then march them, new clause, march them off.
Okay, does that come off kind of screwy to you on that page, or am I just tripping?
Well,
I think you're just missing a comma.
yeah, so I formed them in a line as soldiers, and after carrying them through all the maneuvers I was master of, marched them off to Mr. Francis's, about 600 yards distant.
Okay. I was master of, marched them off to Mr. Francis, about 600-yard distance.
Sam and Will went to the door and knocked. Mr. Francis asked who was there. Sam replied it was him, and he had a letter for him, on which he got up and came to the door. They immediately seized him, and dragging him out a little from the door, he was dispatched by repeated blows on the head. There was no other white person in the family. They started from there for Mrs. Reese's, maintaining the most perfect silence on their march, where, finding the door unlocked, they entered and murdered Mrs. Reese in her bed while sleeping. Her son awoke, but it was only to sleep the sleep of death. He had only time to say, "Who is that?" and he was no more.
From Mrs. Reese's, we went to Mrs. Turner, a mile distance, which we reached about sunrise on Monday morning. Henry, Austin, and Sam went to the still. We're finding Mr. Peoples. Austin shot him, and the rest of us went to the houses. As we approached, the family discovered us and shut the door. Vane Hope! Will, with one stroke of his axe, opened it. And we entered and found Mrs. Turner and Mrs. Newsom in the middle of the room, almost frightened to death. We immediately killed Mrs. Turner with one blow of his axe. I took Mrs. Newsom by the hand, and with the sword I had when I was apprehended, I struck her several blows over the head. But not being able to kill her, as the sword was dull, Will turning around and discovering it, he dispatched her also.
A general destruction of property and search for money and ammunition always succeeded the murders. By this time, the company amounted to 15, and 9 men mounted, who started from Mrs. Whitehead's. The other 6 were to go through by way of Mr. Bryant's and rejoin them at Mrs. Whitehead's.
As we approached the house, we discovered Mr. Richards Whitehead standing in the cotton patch near the lane fence. We called him over in the lane, and Will, the executioner, was near at hand with his fatal axe to send him to an untimely grave.
I think
As we
that,
push on to the house,
we called him over into the lane, so they're saying they called to Mr. Whitehead, right?
Right.
Let's
Okay.
have you call out his name.
okay,
We called him over.
into the
the
lane, Mr. Whitehead and Will, the executioner, was near at hand with his fatal axe to send him to an untimely grave. As we pushed on to the house, I discovered someone ran round the garden, and thinking it was some of the White family, I pursued them, but finding it was a servant girl belonging to the house. I returned to commence the work of death, but they whom I left had not been idle. All the family were already murdered, but Mrs. Whitehead and her daughter, Margaret. As I came round to the door, I saw Will pulling Mrs. Whitehead out of the house, and at the step, he nearly severed her head from her body with his broad axe. Miss Margaret, when I discovered her, had concealed herself in the corner, formed by the projection of the setter cap from the house. On my approach, she fled, but was soon overtaken, and after repeated blows with the sword, I killed her by the blow on the head. With the fence rail, by this time, the 6 who had gone by Mr. Bryant's rejoined us and informed me they had done the work of death assigned to them.
All right, this is extremely important because this is the one murder he commits. He doesn't, of almost 60 white men, women, and children, this is the one that he actually literally commits.
Okay.
All right?
So with that one, like I said, furthermore projection.
And
I discovered her and concealed herself in the corner formed by the projection of the cellar cap from the house. On my approach, she fled, but was soon overtaken, and after repeated blows with the sword, I killed her by a blow on the head with the fence rail. Okay, explain that to me. He killed her on the blow on the head with the fence rail?
A fence made out of wooden rails. The sword wasn't doing the job, so he pulled a fence rail up from the fence and just whacked her over the head with that to club her to death.
Okay, so I'm gonna put with a fence rail.
you're gonna put what now?
With.
There is a width there.
Yeah.
Killed her by a blow on the head with a fence rail.
Okay, I must have missed. I must have missed the whip because okay, that
And I'd
sounds
like
much better.
narrator to pick up by this time.
I killed her with the blow on the head with the fence rail.
All right.
By this time, the 6 who had gone by Mrs.
Okay, yeah, we had me picking up at we get
I
divided, but
know,
but
right.
we can change that and have me. All right. Let's mark that. By this time, the six who had gone by Mrs. Bryant's rejoined the party and informed Nat that they had done the work of death assigned them. They again divided, part going to Mr. Richard Porter's, and from thence to Nathaniel Francis's, the others to Mr. Howell Harris's and Mr. T. Doyle's.
On my reaching Mr. Porter's, he had escaped with his family. I understood there that the alarm had already spread, and I immediately returned to bring up those sent to Mr. Doyle's and Mr. Howard Harris. The party I left going on to Mr. Francis, having told them I would join them in that neighborhood. I met these sent to Mr. Doyle and Mr. Harris returning. Having met Mr. Doyle on the road and killed him, and learning from some who joined them that Mr. Harris was from home, I immediately pursued the course taken by the party gone on before, but knowing they would complete the work of death and pillage at Mr. Francis before I could get there. I went to Mr. Peter Edwards, expecting to find him there, but they had been here also. I then went to Mr. J.T. Burroughs. They had been here and murdered him. I pursued on their tracks to Captain DeWitt Harris, where I found the greater part mounted and ready to start. The man, now amounting to about 40, shouted and hurrahed as I rode up. Somewhere in the yard, loading their guns, others drinking.
Captain Harris and his family had escaped. The property in the house the rebels destroyed, robbing him of money and other valuables.
I ordered, march on. This was about 9 or 10 o'clock.
Mount up, let's go.
Is that what we said?
Mm-hmm.
I ordered them, mount up, let's go. This was about 9 or 10 o'clock. And I lost my place. Hold on.
Middle of 25.
Okay. Okay. Instantly, this was about 9 or 10 o'clock. Monday morning, I proceeded to Mr. Levi Waller's, 2 or 3 miles distance. I took my station in the rear, and as it was my object to carry terror and devastation wherever we went, I placed 14 or 20 of the best armed and most to be relied on in front, who generally approached the houses as fast as their horses could run. This was for 2 purposes: to prevent their escape and to strike terror in the inhabitants.
On this account, Nat never got to the houses after leaving Mrs. Whitehead's until the murders were committed, except in one case.
I sometimes got in sight in time to see the work of death completed, viewed the mangled bodies as they lie in silent sophistication and immediately satisfaction, and immediately started in quest of other victims.
Having murdered Mrs. Waller and 10 children, they started for Mr. William Williams. Having killed him and 2 little boys that were there, while engaged in this, Mrs. Williams fled and got some distance from the house, but she was pursued, overtaken, and compelled to get up behind one of the company, who brought her back, and, after showing her the mangled body of her lifeless husband, she was told to get down and lay by his side, where she was shot dead.
I then started for Mr. Jacob Williams, where the family was murdered. Here we found a young man named Drury, who had come on business with Mr. Williams. He was pursued, overtaken, and shot. Mrs. Vaughn was the next place we visited, and after murdering the family here, I determined on starting for Jerusalem. Our members amounted now to about 50 or 60, all mounted and armed with guns, axes, swords, and clubs. On reaching Mr. James W. Parker's gate, Immediately on the road leading to Jerusalem, and about 3 miles distance, it was proposed to me to call there, but I objected, as I knew he was gone to Jerusalem, and my object was to reach there as soon as possible. But some of the men having relations at Mr. Parker's, it was agreed that they might call and get his people.
What do they mean by having relations?
Relatives.
Relatives.
Oh, okay.
Don't go there.
Gotta ask me. I ain't know when you said relations. Should have just said relatives. Okay, gotcha.
This is when miscommunication becomes so important, you know?
Yeah, right. To call there, but I objected, as I knew he was gone to Jerusalem, and my object was to reach there as soon as possible. But some of the men having relations at Mr. Parker's, it was agreed that they might call and get his people. I remained at the gate on the road with seven or eight, the others going across the field to the house, about a half mile off. After waiting some time for them, I became impatient and started to the house for them.
On their return, they were met by a party of white men who had pursued their blood-stained track, and who fired on those at the gate and dispersed them, which Nat knew nothing of, not having been at that time rejoined by any of them.
Immediately on discovering the whites, I ordered my man to halt, and form. As they appeared to be alarmed, the white men, 18 in number, approached us in about 100 yards, when one of them fired.
This was against the positive orders of Captain Alexander P. Peat, who commanded and who had directed the men to reserve their fire until within 30 paces.
And I discovered about half of them retreating. I then ordered my man to fire and rush on them. The few remaining stood their ground until we approached within 50 yards. When they found and retreated, we pursued and overtook some of them who we thought we left for dead.
They were not killed.
After pursuing them about 200 yards and rising a little here, I discovered they were met by other parties and had halted and were reloading their guns.
This was a small party from Jerusalem who knew the Negroes were in the field and had just tied their horses to await their return to the road, knowing that Mr. Parker and family were in Jerusalem, but knew nothing of the party that had gone in with Captain Peat. On hearing the firing, they immediately rushed to the spot and arrived just in time to arrest the progress of these barbarous villains and save the lives of their friends and fellow citizens.
Thinking that those who retreated first and the party fired on us at 50 or 60 yard distance had all only fallen back to meet others with ammunition, as I saw them reloading their guns, and more coming up than I saw at first, and several of my bravest men being wounded, the others became panicked and squared over the field. The white man pursued and fired on us several times.
Squandered over the field.
What did I say?
You said squared.
Squandered over the field. The white man pursued and fired on us several times. Hark had his horse shot under him, and I caught another from him for him as it was running by me. 5 or 6 of my men were wounded, but none left on the field. Finding myself defeated here, I instantly determined to go through a private way and cross the Notting Way River at the Cypress Bridge, 3 miles below Jerusalem, and attack that place in the rear. As I expected, they would look for me on the other road. And I had a great desire to get there to procure arms and ammunition. After giving a short distance in this private way, accompanied by about 20 men, I overtook 2 or 3 who told me the others was despised.
Dispersed.
dispersed in every direction. After trying in vain to collect the significant
A sufficient.
why do I want to say significant so freaking bad for that word?
That's a significant question.
To collect sufficient force to proceed to Jerusalem, I determined to return, as I was sure they would make back to their old neighborhood, where they would rejoin me, make new recruits, and come down again. On my way back, I called at Mr. Thomas, Mr. Spencer, and several other places. The white families having fled, we found no more victims to justify our gratify our thirst for blood.
Now, see, that's a line that I believe that was Gray written, to gratify our thirst for blood. I don't believe that Turner would say that, actually. But anyway, then go ahead, keep moving.
At Major Ridley's quarters for the night, and being joined by four of his men, with the recruits made since my defeat, we mustered now about 40 strong. After placing out signals, I laid down to sleep, but were quickly roused by a great racket starting up. I found some mounting and others in great confusion. One of the sentinels, having given the alarm that we were about to be attacked, I ordered some to ride round and reconnoiter. Okay, that is going to give me an issue. I can already tell you that.
Well, for now, let's keep moving.
Do you want to replace reconnoiter with scout?
With who?
Scout.
Yeah, that can be good.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. That we were about to attack. I ordered some to ride round and scout, and on their return, the others being more alarmed, not knowing who they were, fled in different ways, so that I was reduced to about 20 again. With this, I determined to attempt to recruit and proceed on to rally in the neighborhood I had left. Dr. Blunt's was the nearest house, which we reached just before day. On riding up the yard, Hart fired a gun. We expected Dr. Blunt and his family were at Major Wrigley's, as I knew there was a company of men there. The gun was fired to assert if any of the family.
That's an AS.
That is a. Fired to ascertain if any of the family were at home. We were immediately fired upon and retreated, leaving several of my men. I do not know what became of them, as I never saw them afterwards. Pursuing our course back and coming in sight of Captain Harris, where we had been the day before, we discovered a party of white men at the house, on which all deserted me but two, Jacob and Nate. We concealed ourselves in the woods until near night, when I sent them in search of Henry, Sam Nelson, and Hart, and directed them to rally all they could at the places we had our dinner the Sunday before, where they would find me. And I accordingly returned there as soon as it was dark and remained until Wednesday evening. When discovering white men riding around the place as though we were looking for someone, and none of my men joining me, I concluded Jacob and Nate had been taken and compelled to betray me. On this, I gave up all hope for the present. And on Thursday night, after having supplied myself with provisions from Mr. Travis's, I scratched a hole under a pile of fence rails in a field, where I concealed myself for 6 weeks, never leaving my hiding place, but for a few minutes in the dead of night to get water, which was very near. Thinking by this time I can venture out, I begun to go out about the night and eavesdrop the houses in the neighborhood. Pursuing this course for about a fortnight and gathering little or no intelligence, afraid of speaking to any human beings, and returning every morning to my cave before the dawn of day, I know not how long I might have led this life if accidents had not betrayed me. A dog in the neighborhood passing by my hiding place one night while I was out was attracted by the meat I had in my cave and crawled in and stole it and was coming out just as I returned. A few nights later, two Negroes, having started to go hunting with the same dog, had passed that way, and the dog came again to the place, and having just gone out to walk about, discovering me, and barked, on which, thinking myself discovered, I spoke to them to beg concealment. On making myself known, they fled from me. Knowing then they would betray me, I immediately left my hiding place and was pursued almost incessantly, until I was taken a fortnight afterwards by Mr. Benjamin Phillips in a little hole I had dug out with my sword for the purpose of concealment under the top of a fallen tree.
On Mr. Phipps discovering the place of his concealment, he cocked his gun and aimed at Nat.
"Don't shoot."
"Your sword, boy."
I delivered it to him, and he brought me to prison. During the time I was pursued, I had many hair's breadth escapes, which your time will not permit you to relate. I am here loaded with chains and willing to suffer the fate that awaits me.
I here proceeded to make some inquiries of him after assuring him of the certain death that awaited him, and that concealment would only bring destruction on the innocent as well as guilty of his own color. If he knew of any extensive or concerted plan, his answer was,
I see, sir, you doubt my words.
No, not yet. I do not.
Where are you? Because I'm...
Last two words of page 31, first word of 32.
Okay, how did I miss that? Keep going.
Okay, so his answer was,
No, start over.
all right. I here proceeded to make some inquiries of him after assuring him of the certain death that awaited him, and that concealment would only bring destruction on the innocent as well as guilty of his own of his own color. If he knew of any extensive or concerted plan, his answer was,
I do not.
When I questioned him as to the insurrection in North Carolina happening about the same time, he denied any knowledge of it. And when I looked him in the face as though I would search his innermost thoughts, he replied,
I see, sir, you doubt my word. But can you not think the same ideas and strange appearances about this time in the heavens might prompt others, as well as myself, to this undertaking?
I now had much conversation with and asked him many questions, having forborne to do so previously, except in the cases noted in parentheses. But during his statement, I had, unnoticed by him, taken notes as to some particular circumstances, and, having the advantage of his statement before me in writing, on the evening of the third day that I had been with him, I began a cross-examination, and found his statement corroborated by every circumstance coming within my own knowledge, or the confessions of others whom had been either killed or executed, and whom he had not seen nor had any knowledge since the 22nd of August last. He expressed himself fully satisfied as to the impracticability of his attempt. It has been said that he was ignorant and cowardly, and that his object was to murder and rob for the purpose of obtaining money to make his escape. It is notorious that he was never known to have $1 in his lap, to swear an oath, or to drink a drop of spirits. As to his ignorance, he certainly never had the advantages of education, but he can read and write, it was taught to him by his parents, and for natural intelligence and quickness of apprehension is surpassed by few men I have ever seen. As to his being a coward, his reason as given for not resisting Mr. Phipps shows the decision of his character. When he saw Mr. Phipps present his gun, he said he knew it was impossible for him to escape, as the woods were full of men. He therefore thought it was better to surrender and trust to fortune for his escape. He is a complete fanatic, or plays the part most admirably. He is a complete fanatic, or plays his part most admirably. On other subjects, he possesses an uncommon share of intelligence, with a mind capable of attaining anything, but warped and perverted by the influence of his early impressions. He is below the ordinary stature, though strong and active, having the true Negro face, every feature of which is strongly marked. I shall not attempt to describe the effect of his narrative, as told and commented on by myself, in the condemned hole of the prison. The calm, deliberate composure with which he spoke of his late deeds and intentions, the expression of his fiend-like face when excited by enthusiasm, still bearing the stains of the blood of helpless innocence about him, clothed with rags and covered with chains, yet daring to raise his manacled hands to heaven, with a spirit soaring above the attributes of man. I looked on him, and my blood curdled in my veins. I will not shock the feelings of humanity, nor wound afresh the bosoms of disconsolate sufferers in this unparalleled and inhuman massacre, by detailing the deeds of their fiend-like barbarity. There were 2 or 3 who were in the power of these wretches, had they known it, and who escaped in the most providential manner. There were 2 whom they thought they had left dead on the field at Mr. Parker's, but who were only stunned by the blows of their guns, as they did not take time to reload when they charged on them. The escape of a little girl who went to school at Mr. Waller's, and when the children were collected for that purpose, excited general sympathy. As their teacher had not arrived, they were at play in the yard, and seeing the Negroes approach, she ran up on a dirt chimney, such as are common in log houses, and remained there unnoticed during the massacre of the 11 that were killed at this place. She remained on her hiding place till just before the arrival of a party who were in pursuit of the murderers, when she came down and fled to a swamp, where, a mere child as she was, with the horrors of the late scene before her, she lay concealed until the next day. Seeing a party go up to the house, she came up, and, on being asked how she escaped, replied with the utmost simplicity, "The Lord helped her." She was taken up behind a gentleman of the party and returned to the arms of her weeping mother. Miss Whitehead concealed herself between the bed and mat that supported it, while they murdered her sister in the same room, without discovering her. She was afterwards carried off and concealed for protection by a slave of the family, who gave evidence against several of them on their trial. Miss Nathaniel Francis, while concealed in a closet, heard their blows and the shrieks of the victims of these ruthless savages. They then entered the closet where she was concealed and went out without discovering her. While in this hiding place, she heard 2 of her women in a quarrel about the division of her clothes. Mr. John T. Barron, discovering them approaching his house, told his wife to make her escape, and, scorning to fly, fell fighting on his own threshold. After firing his rifle, he discharged his gun at them and then broke it over the villain who first approached him. But he was overpowered and slain. His bravery, however, saved from the hands of these monsters his lovely and amiable wife, who will long lament a husband so deserving of her love. As directed by him, she attempted to escape through the garden, when she was caught and held by one of her servant girls. But another coming to her rescue, she fled to the woods and concealed herself. Few indeed were those who escaped their work of death, but fortunate for society, The hand of retributive justice has overtaken them, and not one that is known to be concerned has escaped.
How did he know all of this? Did he make it up?
No, he's saying that this is what Nat said to him, told him the events
Well,
of the battle.
and these bits are the testimony of the handful of white survivors that he's encapsulating. So the little girl who hid in the chimney and then in the swamp, she told her rescuers this is what happened. The girl who hid herself under her mattress said, "This is how I got away." The woman who hid in the closet.
So he's not just interviewing Matt. He interviewed the survivors.
Well, I don't know if he interviewed them personally, but they would have testified at the trials of the insurrectionists who were executed, Nat Turner himself, and the ones who were executed in the weeks beforehand while he was still hidden.
Do you want to put other people in those places to tell that story?
No. But I do want it to be the question asked if this is indeed what Nat would say happened, or if this is Thomas Gray, embellishing, from his biased perspective, So I think that's a good question, definitely.
I mean, Gray is definitely editorializing here,
Yeah.
but
He's
This
more or less
doesn't-
given the facts of what happened,
he's
Yeah.
relaying the testimony of surviving eyewitnesses to the insurrection in this passage.
Mhm. The Commonwealth versus Nat Turner, charged with making insurrection and plotting to take away the lives of diverse free white people, persons, and etc. on the 22nd of August, 1831. The court composed of having met for the trial of Nat Turner, the prisoner was brought in and arraigned, and upon his arraignment pleaded not guilty. No, you say that line, right? And upon his arraignment pleaded,
Not guilty.
saying to his counsel that he did not feel so. On the part of the Commonwealth, Levi Waller was introduced, who was being sworn, deposed as follows, agreeably to Nat's own confession. So this is actually, we will continue to let this be Thomas Gray. And that would be the last, this Commonwealth versus Nat Turner.
So you want me to continue until page 38?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
And that's it right there.
All right. Shall we go over that now, or
Well, I think we're good to know in terms
Okay.
of what we've done here.
good, because my throat's starting to get out.
Yeah, I think we've done a lot here. And that's I can tell you guys have been working. I can tell. So thank you very much for that, definitely. And
Yeah, it's a lot of dialogue to carry.
Mhm.
It's rough on me, and it's murder on Jamel.
Mhm.
This is
a lot.
We walk tomorrow. So after I walk, we come here, of course.
Okay.
Tomorrow, I think we should start actually setting this as a scene. So you're interviewing me. So it would be
all right. So the way I'm going to try and do it is when I'm narrating, turn directly to the camera,
right.
and when I'm asking you questions, turn to you.
Right.
And as much as I can, turn to face you while you're speaking to Gray.
Right.
What do you do to speak?
So that's going to be that
Yeah.
scene.
So, very simple staging for this.
Right.
Abolitionists Museum.
Right.
And that scene.
That's it. I'm hungry. Very hungry. I am.
Scene 7.
Trying to see what I actually have enough time to start.
You want me to come over there?
Yeah, so this is, what are we doing? We did the Confessions of Nat Turner, that rehearsal here, and that concludes our rehearsal for today, which is day 7 of 12 Days of Turner. And we're going to look to present this as a reading for a little bit of an audience next week on the 11th, on our final day of the 12 Days of Turner. Thank you. See you next time.
Wait. We'll see if we can talk about it.
What you need?
Got crumbs on the